Raghav Sharma was the kind of police officer people trusted without question, and Ananya Verma was the spirited young woman next door. No one in their quiet town could have imagined their secret would ignite a chain of events ending in two brutal murders and the downfall of a hero. Inspector Raghav Sharma had a reputation that most officers could only dream of. In the narrow lanes of his small Indian town, his name was spoken with respect. He had brought down dangerous criminals, solved missing person cases that others had given up on, and even handled delicate disputes between neighbors with calm authority. People saw him as the symbol of honesty and discipline. He lived in a modest government quarter with his devoted wife, Sunita, and their 12-year-old son, Arif. Life for the Sharma family seemed steady, predictable, and enviable. Next door lived the Verma family, who had moved in just over a year ago. They were polite, kept to themselves, and rarely gave anyone reason to gossip. The Vermas had two children, the elder son, Rohan, and their youngest, Ananya. At 21, Ananya was in her final year of college. She was lively, sharp, and had a certain charm that drew people in without her trying. Often, she would sit in the small garden outside her home, reading novels or scrolling on her phone, the scent of jasmine from her mother's plants filling the air. From his balcony, Raghav would sometimes see her coming and going, laughing with friends or feeding the stray dogs that lingered near the gate. To him, she was just the cheerful girl next door, someone he'd greet politely when their paths crossed. But proximity has a way of changing boundaries. The thin walls of government housing meant their daily routines subtly intertwined. Sounds of laughter, footsteps on the stairs, faint music drifting through open windows. In the quiet rhythm of their neighborhood, nothing seemed unusual. No one would have guessed that beneath the calm surface of Raghav's perfect life, the first ripples of something dangerous were beginning to form. It was only a matter of time before those ripples turned into a storm. It began innocently enough. Raghav and Ananya would bump into each other at the staircase or the small roadside tea stall where he stopped on his way back from duty. Their exchanges were polite, even casual, comments about the weather, the noise from the market, or a new neighbor moving in. But the frequency of these encounters slowly increased. Some days, Raghav would adjust his schedule so their paths might cross, lingering just long enough for a brief conversation. He told himself it was harmless. When Sunita visited her parents in another city for a few days, Raghav found himself with long stretches of free time. One afternoon, Ananya knocked on his door to borrow a book she had seen on his shelf through the open window. He invited her in, offering tea. That first visit stretched into hours, filled with laughter and small confessions. From then on, she stopped by more often, sometimes to share a snack she had made, sometimes just to chat. The walls that should have kept them apart began to crumble. Raghav's training as a police officer had taught him to read people, but here, he ignored the warning signs. He didn't notice how his heart beat faster when she smiled. Or maybe he did, and simply didn't care. Ananya, too, seemed drawn to the authority and quiet confidence he carried. Soon, they were meeting during the afternoons, when most of the neighborhood was at work or college. He began telling lies, claiming extra patrol duty or sudden case work, to spend more time with her. What they shared was no longer just neighborly warmth. It was a dangerous intimacy, stitched together by secrecy and fueled by the thrill of getting away with it. Neither of them realized they were building something that could only end in destruction. It was Rohan, Ananya's elder brother, who first sensed something was wrong. At first, it was only small things. Ananya slipping out of the house at odd times, returning with a faint trace of perfume that wasn't hers, or the way she seemed lost in thought during family dinners. Rohan dismissed it as ordinary college life, but his unease grew when he noticed Inspector Raghav leaving their home more than once when their parents were away. The two families were close enough to visit each other, but these visits were oddly timed, often when the streets outside were quiet. One evening, Rohan saw Ananya waiting near the gate, her eyes scanning the road as if expecting someone. Minutes later, Raghav's car pulled up, and she got inside without hesitation. The sight froze him in place. He didn't want to believe what he had just witnessed, but the image refused to leave his mind. That night, he tried to confront Ananya casually, asking where she had been. She brushed off his questions with vague answers, but her defensiveness only deepened his suspicion. In the days that followed, Rohan began quietly watching. He noticed patterns, Raghav would often return from work, park his vehicle, and within minutes, disappear toward their side of the building. Ananya, too, would suddenly become busy during those times. Convinced that something inappropriate was happening, he resolved to gather proof. Armed with a second-hand camera, Rohin began taking photographs from the balcony, careful to remain hidden. Every click of the shutter felt like a betrayal, yet he told himself it was necessary to protect his family's dignity. In his mind, he was uncovering a dangerous truth. What he didn't know was that his quiet investigation was about to set a deadly sequence of events into motion, one that no one would be able to stop. The envelope arrived without warning, tucked neatly among the usual stack of files on Raghav's desk at the police station. At first, he assumed it was just another case report. But when he opened it, his pulse quickened. Inside were several grainy photographs. Him and Ananya, together in his car, entering his house, even one of her leaning casually against his balcony railing. Alongside the pictures was a single sheet of paper, the handwriting sharp and deliberate. "End it now, or everyone will know." For a moment, he felt the air leave his lungs. His career had been built over years of discipline and sacrifice, and now everything he had, his job, his family, his reputation, hung by a thread. His first instinct was to destroy the photographs, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. Instead, he locked them in his desk drawer, the metal clink of the key sounding far too loud in the quiet room. That night, he couldn't sleep. Every creak of the house made him think of someone lurking outside, watching. He replayed in his head every meeting with Ananya, every careless moment, and cursed himself for letting it go so far. By morning, fear had hardened into something darker, anger. He convinced himself that someone was trying to ruin him, and he needed to know who. When he confronted Ananya, his voice was low but sharp. She insisted she had told no one, but her hesitation betrayed her. She suspected her brother, Rohin, and pleaded with Raghav not to make things worse. But her words only fanned the fire in his mind. To Raghav, this was no longer about desire or secrecy. It was about survival. And survival, he thought, might require silencing the threat before it could destroy him completely. The rain had been falling for hours, hammering against rooftops and turning the narrow lanes into shallow streams. Most of the neighborhood stayed indoors, the sound of the storm muffling the world outside. Raghav saw this as his moment. Clad in a dark raincoat, he left his house under the pretense of checking on a police matter, but his destination was the Verma residence. He knew Ananya's parents were away visiting relatives, and that Rohin would be the only other person at home. When he arrived, water dripping from his hair and clothes, Rohin was in the living room. The tension was immediate, unspoken but heavy. Raghav didn't bother with pleasantries. The confrontation erupted fast, accusations, threats, and bitter truths spilling out. Rohin called him a disgrace, warned that the photographs would be shown to his superiors. That word, photographs, hit Raghav like a spark to dry tinder. The argument escalated, voices rising over the roar of the rain. In a moment of blind rage, Raghav grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter. Rohin tried to defend himself, but the struggle was fierce and short. The blade struck deep, and Rohin collapsed to the floor, his blood pooling dark against the tiles. Ananya, hearing the commotion from her room, rushed in. She froze at the sight of her brother on the ground and Raghav standing over him. When she tried to push him away, his panic surged into violence. The knife lashed out again, and this time she fell, gasping, her hands clutching at the wound. The storm outside raged on, drowning the streets in water, while inside the Verma home, 2 lives had ended. Raghav stood there trembling, soaked in rainwater and blood, the reality of what he had done pressing down on him like a weight he could never lift. Raghav's instincts as a police officer told him to act quickly. His mind raced for a way out, a version of events that would make sense to investigators. He dragged Rohin's body closer to the front door, knocked over a chair, and pulled open drawers to make it look like a burglary. He even placed the knife on the floor near Rohin's hand, hoping to suggest a struggle with an intruder. The rain, he thought, would wash away any traces outside. But in his panic, he overlooked the details that would betray him. By the time he returned home, the night felt endless. His clothes were still damp, the metallic smell of blood lingering no matter how hard he scrubbed his hands. Hours later, A neighbor discovered the scene and called the police. Raghav was among the first to arrive, wearing the mask of a shocked officer. But as his colleagues moved through the house, their eyes began to narrow. They noticed muddy footprints inside, prints that matched the shoes Raghav was wearing. They found fibers from his raincoat snagged on a door hinge. And the knife, instead of being wiped clean by a burglar, carried his fingerprints clear as day. Suspicion turned into certainty within hours. Raghav was taken into custody, his badge removed in front of men who had once saluted him. News of his arrest spread fast, and the scandal consumed the town. During the trial, the photographs, the affair, and the murders were laid bare for all to see. The judge's words were cold and final: life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In prison, Raghav became just another inmate, stripped of the authority and respect he had once commanded. The house next door, where it all began, stood locked and empty, a silent monument to a secret that destroyed everything it touched.